Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Roberts, and I am the host of, CTA's podcast, Court Calls. This is a show where callers ask questions to our panel concerning doubtful calls on the tennis courts. Let's meet our panelists. We have Joanne Hudley, our USTA umpire. Joanne, are you there?
I'm here.
Hello, Joanne. And we have Steve Rockkind, who is the Hillside High School tennis coach and vice president of the CTA. Steve, are you here?
Let's try Riverside High School, not Hillside.
Sorry, Riverside. I keep saying Hillside. I'm sorry.
I
Riverside
don't know
High School. Got it.
Okay.
Before we start taking our calls, Steve, are there any news out there about reopening any of our courts?
Oh my gosh, I wish there was. We've been in contact with USTA North Carolina. They still have a date of June 1st as something that they'd like to fantasize about, that they would like to reopen at that time. But there is absolutely nothing firm yet. I think, at least for North Carolina, they're waiting to see what happens as the governor starts loosening some of the restrictions. And as that goes forward, we'll kind of see whether June 1st is a real viable thing or not. What we did find out from the USTA is that each individual state really can make individual decisions about whether they want to reopen or not. They don't have to wait on the section to decide. So if North Carolina, for some reason or other, feels like they're ready to go June 1, they can start leagues up if they want to. I know there's been a lot of discussion between the local league coordinators and USTA North Carolina regarding exactly how to go about doing that. And there's been some good movement. There's a lot of good suggestions around, and people are being real proactive about deciding about how they're going to decide this. As far as the cities in our surrounding areas, some courts, some private clubs have opened up. We understand that Hollow Rock has reopened for singles, and that Chapel Hill Tennis Club is reopened for singles. As far as we know right now, UNC Farm is still closed, and I don't know about anybody else right now. But I've also been in contact with Durham Parks and Rec, and my hearing from them is that it's a real wait and see for them as well. They have no idea. They're not taking court rentals right now or anything like that.
Okay, well, thanks for that update, Steve. Hopefully we'll get on the court sooner than later. Let me introduce you to our first caller who just called in. We've got Cody from Durham. Cody, welcome to our show. What's your question?
Hey guys, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this to keep the tennis community at least kind of together during all this craziness. My question is regarding foot faults and what is the appropriate action to take when you're playing someone that just will not stop foot faulting, even if you make a suggestion to them in a nice way. Legally, can you call a foot fault on them and try to take the point? I know this is not the nicest approach, but if someone keeps doing it and they really are getting a clear advantage, my question is that a call you can make and legally take the point? And as sort of a follow-up to that, if you're at a tournament, a USTA sanctioned event, or something like that, can you ask for somebody to watch the lines on the foot fault, which is what we used to do when I played juniors and in college tennis? So just not really sure if that's even an option. So
that's a great question, Cody. Who wants to take this one?
Well, I can start, and I think Joanne's gonna come in right behind me on this.
Okay, well, this is a multi-part question.
Yeah. So in terms of the first part, let's talk about when someone is at a non-sanctioned event or USTA league event. The answer is, yeah, you can ask them about it, but no, you can't take the point. And the deal is that if someone, let's use league play to start with. So if you're in a league situation and somebody foot faults and they are, as you say, gaining an advantage from that, the first thing you do is you say to them, hey, I notice you're foot faulting, can you not do that? And the foot fault is one of those calls that is unfortunately, the player is a player-controlled call. And so you can ask them, and if they say, no, I'm not, if you're in a USTA match, you can ask the captains, if they don't happen to be playing, if they want to come out and the opposite captain watch foot faults. And that's really groovy, but very few situations actually lend themselves to that, where somebody can do that and then have it work out. And then in terms of tournament and stuff, I'm going to throw it over to Joanne.
Well, there's one piece I want to pick up on. It doesn't have to be gain an advantage. If your foot touches the line, that's a football.
Right.
And yes, the steps turn out to be, you can, if you, in an unofficiated match and you think your opponent is foot faulting, you can ask them to stop, tell them you noticed and ask them to stop. Well, first of all, you could go get an official, but there's not one. But if they continue to foot fault, and the key word here is flagrant. If it's flagrant, yes, you can call a foot fault. And then you have to live with the consequences of having the ill will of your opponent.
And how do you define flagrant, Joanne?
Obvious and definite.
Intentional.
Ah.
Does that answer your question, Cody?
It does.
Cody,
You know,
Cody.
I feel it's something that's definitely hard to call, but there are people that have that unfortunately have the reputation for foot faulting, you know, and it gets around the circles. So sometimes you play these people that they do it and they don't really even realize they're doing it because it's just how they serve, you know, and they've done it so long, or especially at the 4 or 5 and above level, people really do serve and volley and gain an advantage from foot faulting. And, you know, sometimes you show up to a match and you expect it, and you sort of ask them not to do it, but they either can't or won't stop. So I think most people will not make the call as to not create an issue. But I just wanted to know legally what you can do. You know,
Yes, you can.
You can make the call because especially if you're playing a 4-5 or 5-0 match and somebody's coming in and putting an overhead away on every point, you know, it really does make a difference in the result of what you're able to do with the return. So
What have you done when it's happened to you?
You know, I have not. I've mostly this person that I'm talking about I play with. So I'm just wondering if I ever do have to play against them, what can I actually do and get away with, you know? And but not that I would necessarily do it, but just you know, what is actually legal is, I think, a good question.
Well, what it is a form of cheating.
Yeah. It's hard though, I think, for some people to even realize that they're doing it. You know, it's one thing to do it intentionally, and I think it's another thing if you mention it and then they can't or won't stop. You know, then that's when I might be tempted to call it.
Steve, what do you tell your team at school?
Well, I was just thinking about that. I have one of my high school players does, he foot faults, unfortunately, way too often, and he's my number 2. Yeah, he's my number 2 right now, number 2 and number 3. And he and I have been working on it. He doesn't want to foot fault, but you know, he's unfortunately learned a service motion that works really well for him. He's got a nice hard serve, and he unfortunately, definitely, that foot dives over the line well before he strikes the ball. And he and I are working on it. Interestingly, no one from another team has called him on it. And he's now, he'll be a senior this coming year, but he was a junior in the spring before the season ended. And we tried really hard to work on that in the 5 matches we had before the season went away. And like I say, no other coach or no other player has ever said anything to him about it. But I've told my guys, not good example, I've told my guys that if somebody is foot faulting on them, to bring it to my attention, and then I'll bring it to their coach's attention. And then again, if it's really egregious, then we might have to have coaches on the court. And in high school, you're allowed to do that.
Right.
You know, they'll bring coaches on the court, and the coaches will call it, and what the coach says stands. And the coach will call the opposite players serving or whatever lines.
Right.
And I've been in that situation where I had to come on the court and call lines, or because of disagreements that couldn't be resolved between players. So yeah, it does happen that way.
Okay, Cody, I hope that helps you, and I appreciate you coming on. Our next caller is Paula from Cary. Paula, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Great. What's your question?
The other day I was playing a doubles match and my partner twisted her ankle and couldn't continue to play. I'm a slightly better player than she is, so anyway, she agreed to sit beside the court and let me finish the match by myself, but our opponents were not happy and they objected. Did they have a case?
Oh, let me take that one to begin with, Steve.
Definitely.
That your opponents, as good as you are, and as bad as she might be, the opponents do have a case that one player cannot play doubles by herself or himself.
Oh.
Now, what you might consider next time, if it happens, is to have the crippled partner stand on the court with the racket in her hand, and then you play all the points. But technically, she can't sit by the side. She has to be on the court.
Oh, wow, I did not know that. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Yeah, and that's the for real thing. I've been in that situation where there's, you know, one of my players that I was playing with was injured, and we just kept him on the court and told him to stand out of the way mostly, and I tried to retrieve most of the points. I don't recall winning that match. So at least we didn't default it. So
Okay.
yeah, you can do that.
Okay, sounds great.
Thanks, Paula, for calling in. Before we get to our next caller, let's find out what our Eno CTA mascot has been doing at home to help with his tennis skills. Okay, and we're back. Thank you for Eno and that little segment. Our last caller is Chris from Chapel Hill, and Chris has a question. Chris, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you great.
Okay, great. My question is something that comes up a lot, especially in the lower leagues where we have a lot of people playing either for the first time or playing for the first time in a league, and it's sort of just waffling over in and out calls. If you have an opponent who is kind of waffling over making a decision, they'll say things like, I'm not sure, let's replay the point, or I think it might have been out, but I don't know. What can you kind of do, since you don't really have the vantage point to see the out call, to be able to sort of make that decision if you have someone that's waffling and it's hard to sort of keep playing the points?
You have to explain the rules to people, and the rules say that if you're not sure, the point goes to your opponent. And that's in every case, as far as I'm understanding. If your opponent says, I'm not sure, then he must award you the point. When I started playing, I brought a rule book out with me, and I kind of had it turned to that page, and I would show it to them in the rules. And then perhaps they were okay with that. But anyway, that's what I know about that. Joanne, what do you think?
I think when the ball's on my side of the court, it's my call. And if I don't know if I can't know with certainty, then the ball is good. And now sometimes people have that, play with the attitude, when in doubt, call it out. Unfortunately, that's not a rule.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question, Chris. Do you have anything else you want to ask?
No, I think that pretty much clears it up for.
Okay.
Chris, you say that's happened to you a few times?
It definitely happens a lot. Sort of just players get a little bit confused where they want to call something out, but they don't know for sure. So they think it's going to go wide, and then it gets a lot closer to the line than they think it's going to. So then they waffle a little bit over the decision. So I think it's just a question of asking if you want to replay a point versus just making a straight call, I think is the thing that really annoys people on the other side of the net.
What if they say, I don't know, let's replay the point, then what do you do?
I mean, usually if it's only happens maybe once in the match, I would just say, okay, let's replay the point. A lot of times though, I'll tell them that, if you can't make a decision, then it would be in.
As Steve said, that's the rule.
Yeah. So we usually just try to be as courteous as possible, I guess, to the other people, while also trying to get a definitive answer.
There's another caveat to that rule, and the other piece of that is if you ask let's say a ball is on my side and I'm not sure whether it's in and out, and I ask my opponent whether they thought it was in or out. If I ask my opponent, then I have to go along with whatever they say.
I was just getting ready to add that. You're right.
Yeah. And, at the point in time, if now, let's say in your case that your opponent asks you, what did you think? If you say, I think the ball was out, or I think the ball was in, whatever it is, your opponent is bound by the rules to accept your call because they asked you.
We usually try to go with whoever is closest to the line, their call as being the most definitive, because they're obviously going to have the best vantage point. So
Sure.
Another piece of that's, I don't know how much that this is used, but if you see your ball out, then you're obliged to make that call, even if you aren't asked. That's a tough one.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's hard to call your own shot out.
There's a lot of, I was blinded by the sun. The net was in the way.
Or in doubles, when your partner looks at you and you look back and, or your partner makes a call and you're not really sure and you keep your mouth shut because it's your partner who made the call. Yeah, that kind of thing.
That one's tough too.
Great question, Chris. Well, that wraps up another edition of Court Calls. I sure want to thank our callers and our panelists for this edition. And if you have a question that you want to have aired on our next Court Calls podcast, give us a call at 984-377-3130, and we will take your call. Until next time, everybody, thanks for joining us. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.